My name is Harper. I am an ophthalmologist living in San Jose, and until my 34th birthday, I believed my life was ordinary and stable. I had a husband named Grayson, a quiet home, a demanding job, and a family that trusted one another. That night was supposed to be simple. I would cook dinner, we would eat together, and the day would end like every other birthday I had shared with him. Instead, that night quietly opened a story that would expose betrayal, long planning, and a truth that had been hidden in plain sight for months. My shift at the hospital ended earlier than usual because a patient canceled at the last minute. I left the building thinking about dinner, mentally listing the ingredients I needed. I planned to stop at the supermarket and buy fresh seafood, butter, garlic, and herbs. Grayson loved butter garlic crab, and I had learned long ago that cooking his favorite dish was the easiest way to turn an ordinary evening into something warm. I was tired, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that comes from feeling useful. As I slowed near the supermarket entrance, my phone vibrated on the passenger seat. It was a text from Grayson. "Stuck at work. Happy 34th birthday." I stared at the screen for a few seconds. I did not reply. A moment later, another message came in. He explained he had paperwork, elderly clients, and delayed meetings. It was the same explanation I had heard many times before. I placed the phone face down and rested my hand on the steering wheel. I looked at the empty shopping bags on the back seat and felt a sudden resistance rise inside me. I imagined standing alone in the kitchen, cooking a full meal meant for two, listening to the clock, waiting for the sound of his car. That image felt heavier than it should have. I told myself I didn't want to do that tonight, not on my birthday. I turned the steering wheel and drove past the supermarket. Instead, I headed toward my favorite restaurant, a small place with warm lighting and familiar staff. It was not a dramatic decision. It felt practical, almost calm. If I was eating alone, I would at least eat well. I parked, walked inside, and was seated near the window. The restaurant felt safe and unchanged, filled with low conversations, soft music, and the smell of food. I ordered a steak and a glass of red wine. When the wine arrived, I held the glass for a moment and reminded myself that this was still my birthday, whether anyone celebrated it with me or not. At that point, nothing felt wrong yet. I didn't know that less than an hour later, a single sentence from a stranger would quietly destroy everything I thought I understood. I had just finished my meal when the waiter came to my table with the bill. He did not place it down right away. He stood there for a moment, looking at me as if he was deciding whether to speak. Then he leaned closer and lowered his voice. He told me my husband was in one of the private rooms. He said Grayson had just proposed to a woman and that the woman was very beautiful. At first, my mind refused to accept the words. I asked him to repeat himself. He did, using the exact same sentence, then quickly stepped away as if he had already said too much. I sat there without moving. I did not feel angry or shocked yet. My head felt empty, like all sound had been muted at once. I stood up and walked toward the hallway where the private rooms were located. I did not rush. I did not hesitate either. It felt as if my body had already decided what to do before my mind could interfere. With each step, one thought kept repeating in my head. This must be a mistake. There has to be another explanation. When I reached the end of the hallway, I stopped in front of the door marked number 4. I could hear quiet voices inside. Laughter. A tone I recognized too well. I moved closer to the small glass panel on the door and looked inside. Grayson was standing there, close to a woman. His hand rested on her waist in a way that was familiar to me. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not rushed. It was not secretive. It was calm, confident, and deliberate. In that moment, the last excuse I had been holding onto collapsed. The woman turned her head slightly, and I saw her face clearly. It was Tiffany, my cousin Matthew's wife, the same woman who had spent months presenting herself as a devoted caregiver to her sick husband, the same woman everyone in the family admired and defended. I felt my chest tighten, but I did not move. I noticed an open ring box on the table beside them. The ring caught the light. There was no confusion left to cling to. This was not an accident. This was not new. This was planned. I took out my phone and took one photo through the glass. Just one. My hand was shaking, but the image was clear enough. Then I stepped back from the door. I did not confront them. I did not cry. I did not make a scene. I turned around and walked out of the restaurant as if nothing had happened. But by the time I reached my car, I knew one thing with certainty. Whatever this was, it was much bigger than my marriage. I sat in the car longer than I realized. The engine was off. The restaurant lights reflected on the windshield, but I did not look back. I knew if I did, I might lose control. When I finally started driving, my body moved on habit, not thought. I did not cry. I did not speak. My mind stayed fixed on one question: how long has this been happening? I reached home without remembering the drive. The house was dark and quiet. Grayson was not there. I stood in the living room, keys still in my hand, listening to the silence. Everything looked the same. The couch, the photos, the life we had built. None of it reacted to what I had just seen. That made it worse. I sat down and unlocked my phone. The photo was still there. Grayson, Tiffany, the ring. I zoomed in once, then locked the screen again. I did not want to study it. I only needed to know it existed. My first instinct was to call my cousin Matthew. My finger hovered over his name. I imagined his reaction. I imagined his confusion. I imagined the damage one sentence could cause. I put the phone down, then picked it up again, then put it down again. I repeated that cycle until my chest felt tight. For 8 months, Tiffany had played the role of a devoted wife. Everyone believed Matthew was sick. Everyone believed she had sacrificed everything for him. I believed it too. That belief was now the most dangerous part of all this. If I was wrong, I would destroy a family. If I was right, staying silent would make me complicit. I went to bed without changing my clothes. I stared at the ceiling until morning. When daylight came, I still had no answers, but I knew one thing: I could not act on emotion. I needed clarity before I moved. That morning, I booked an appointment with my therapist, not to heal, not to feel better, only to make sure I did not make a mistake I could never undo. By the afternoon, I was sitting across from her, telling the story from the birthday text to the private room. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she asked one question: "How well do you know your cousin?" I answered without hesitation: "He is principled. He does not forgive betrayal." Then she asked the second question: "What happens if he finds out you knew and stayed silent?" I did not answer immediately. I did not need to. The truth was already clear. When I left her office, my decision was made, not out of anger, not out of revenge, out of responsibility. That same afternoon, I drove to Matthew's house. I did not call before going to Matthew's house. I did not want him prepared. If I hesitated again, I knew I might turn back. The gate was unlocked. Tiffany's car was not there. That alone told me she was comfortable leaving him alone. Matthew was in the backyard, sitting in his wheelchair with his back to the house. I stood there for a few seconds, watching him breathe evenly. He did not look weak. He did not look confused. That detail settled in my mind before I spoke. I told him everything in one clear sequence: the birthday text, the restaurant, the private room. Grayson, Tiffany, the ring, the photo. I did not soften anything. I did not rush either. When I finished, I waited for anger, disbelief, or collapse. None of it came. Matthew stayed silent. His hands rested calmly on the armrests. His face did not change. That silence was more frightening than any reaction. Then, without warning, he pressed down lightly and stood up. He stood without help, without shaking, without hesitation. I froze, my mouth opened, but no sound came out. He turned to face me, fully upright, eyes sharp and steady. There was no illness in them, no confusion, only awareness. He said one sentence: "I already know." Before I could speak, he raised his hand, stopping me. Then he explained, slowly and clearly, that the stroke 8 months ago had been mild. The paralysis was fake. The decline was fake. All of it had been an act. He told me Tiffany had started changing before the hospital stay. Late nights, secret calls, a distance that did not belong in a marriage. When the stroke happened, he realized pretending to be weak was the only way to see the truth clearly. She believed it immediately. She wanted to. Matthew told me he had hired a private investigator, a lawyer. He had watched quietly while everyone praised Tiffany for her sacrifice. While she planned her future openly, thinking he could not understand. Then he told me the part that made my stomach drop. Tiffany was not just cheating. She was planning to take the company. She had bribed a doctor. The medical report was false. She planned to present it publicly and declare him unfit to lead. I realized then that what I saw in the restaurant was not the beginning of this story. It was only the moment I was allowed to see it. Matthew looked at me and said the exposure would happen at their anniversary celebration. Publicly, with evidence, with no escape. Then he gave me one instruction. I had to go home and act like nothing had happened. If Grayson sensed anything, he would destroy evidence and disappear. I nodded. I did not trust my voice. When I returned home that night, Grayson arrived later than usual. He smiled. He asked about my day. I answered normally. I cooked. I served dinner. I watched him closely while pretending not to. Then I mentioned the anniversary celebration. For one brief second, his hand froze above the table. The fork slipped from his fingers and hit the plate. He laughed it off, blaming work stress. That was enough. I went to bed beside him that night, fully awake, knowing the trap was already closing. The next morning, I left the house before Grayson woke up. I told him I had an early shift. He believed me without question. That trust felt dangerous now. Every normal interaction felt like part of a lie that was already collapsing. I drove straight to the lawyer Matthew had arranged. I did not hesitate this time. The moment I walked into the office, I understood why Matthew had chosen him. He listened without reacting. No surprise, no judgment, only facts. I showed him the photo. I gave him the timeline. I told him about the engagement ring and the anniversary plan. When I finished, he nodded once and placed a folder on the table. Inside were divorce papers. He told me to sign them, but not to file yet. Filing too early would warn Grayson. Warning him would give him time. I signed. The pen did not shake. That scared me more than anything else. The lawyer told me everything would move after the anniversary. That night was the pressure point. That was when Grayson would be distracted, exposed, and unable to control the situation. Until then, I had to stay invisible. I returned home that evening and acted exactly the same. I asked about work. I listened. I laughed at the right moments. I watched how easily Grayson lied. I realized he had been practicing for a long time. Over the next few days, I noticed changes. He guarded his phone more closely. He stepped outside to take calls. He asked casual questions about Matthew that felt calculated. He was checking for signs. I gave him none. The night before the anniversary, he barely slept. I felt him shift beside me. I kept my breathing steady. I knew he was thinking about Tiffany, about the plan, about what would come after. At the hotel ballroom, everything looked normal on the surface. Family members hugged. Business partners smiled. Tiffany moved through the room like someone who believed she had already won. When she looked at Grayson, there was certainty in her eyes. Matthew arrived late. He was seated near the front. Tiffany placed a hand on his shoulder, guiding him carefully, performing for everyone watching. I saw several people wipe their eyes. The sympathy was real. The deception was complete. When Tiffany stepped onto the stage, Grayson straightened in his seat. His attention was locked on her. Not on me, not on the room, only on the outcome he expected. She began speaking. She talked about sacrifice, about loyalty, about illness. She said Matthew could no longer manage the company. Murmurs spread across the room. Heads turned. Approval formed quietly. I glanced at Grayson. He was smiling. Then Matthew stood up. No help, no pause, no weakness. The room went silent. That was the moment everything changed. Matthew did not rush the stage. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood where he was, fully upright, and looked at Tiffany. The silence that followed was heavy enough to stop every conversation in the room. Tiffany froze. Her expression broke for the first time that night. She asked how long he had been standing like that. He did not answer her. He reached into his pocket and took out a small remote. When he pressed it, the screen behind the stage turned on. The first image appeared without explanation. Tiffany and Grayson outside a hotel. The date and time were visible. A second image followed. The two of them entering together. Then a short video clip played. They were sitting close in a quiet cafe, her hand resting on his arm. The room reacted instantly. Gasps, whispers, chairs shifting. Tiffany shook her head and tried to speak, but the next recording started before she could. A man's voice filled the room. A doctor. He admitted to altering medical reports. He admitted to taking money. He said Tiffany had given instructions. No one interrupted the audio. No one needed clarification. Matthew finally spoke. He said the illness had been exaggerated. The documents were false. The attempt to remove him from the company had been planned. He said everything calmly, as if listing facts already proven. Tiffany stepped back, her hands trembled. She tried to laugh it off, then tried to cry. Neither worked. The room had already turned against her. Someone shouted her name, someone else called her a liar. Two officers entered from the back of the hall. They walked straight toward the stage. Tiffany looked around, searching for Grayson. He was gone. His seat was empty, no jacket, no phone, nothing. The officers placed Tiffany in handcuffs. She did not resist. She only stared at the screen as if hoping it would disappear. When they led her away, the room broke into chaos. Family members stood shouting. Business partners demanded explanations. No one looked at me. I left before it ended. When I reached home, Grayson was already there. He was sitting on the couch, pale and shaking. He looked at me as if he expected anger. I placed the divorce papers on the table between us. He tried to speak. I stopped him with one sentence. I told him not to say my name again. I packed the suitcase I had prepared days earlier and walked out. He followed me to the door, begging, explaining, promising. None of it mattered anymore. 3 days later, Matthew called. Tiffany had confessed. Grayson had been named. 2 days after that, the police came to the house looking for him. He was arrested the same morning. Months later, the court finalized everything. Tiffany went to prison. The doctor lost his license. Grayson was sentenced as an accomplice. I moved cities. I changed nothing about my name. The story ended quietly for me, not with closure, but with distance. The silence after I left the house stayed with me longer than the noise ever had. I stayed with a friend and kept my phone on silent. I did not want explanations. I did not want apologies. I only wanted to see what else would surface now that everything had begun to crack. Matthew called the next morning. His voice was calm, but there was urgency underneath it. He told me the police had taken Tiffany in for questioning through the night. She had denied everything at first. Then the evidence began to stack. The recordings, the transfers, the messages she thought were deleted. One by one, her stories fell apart. Later that day, Matthew sent me a single message. Grayson tried to leave the city. That was the first real shock since the anniversary. Grayson had always been careful, calculated. I assumed he had planned an escape long before things reached this point. But panic had made him reckless. He packed too late, he moved too fast. By evening, the police had him. I did not feel relief when I heard. I felt something closer to confirmation. The kind that leaves no space for doubt. Everything I had seen in that private room was exactly what it looked like. Over the next week, more details surfaced. Grayson had known about the fake medical report. He had helped Tiffany coordinate meetings with the doctor. He believed the company would be hers within days. He believed he would benefit quietly, without exposure. He was wrong. Matthew told me Tiffany broke first. Faced with charges, she tried to shift blame. She admitted to the affair. She admitted to the bribery. She admitted the plan. Grayson's name came up repeatedly. Every denial he made only tightened the case against him. I attended none of the hearings. I followed nothing in real time. I let Matthew and the lawyers handle it. Distance was the only thing that kept me steady. One afternoon, a neighbor called. She said officers had come back to the house with more documents. She said Grayson looked smaller than she remembered. I thanked her and hung up. That night I signed the final papers. No arguments, no revisions, everything was already decided. Weeks later, the sentences were announced. Tiffany received prison time. The doctor lost his license and was charged. Grayson was sentenced as an accomplice. The details were printed online, stripped of emotion, reduced to facts. I read none of the comments. I packed my belongings slowly, only what mattered. I did not look back at the house when I left. I did not need to. The story that began with a birthday text had ended in court records. And for the first time since that night at the restaurant, there was nothing left waiting to be revealed. I thought the worst part was over. I was wrong. The truth had finished unfolding, but the consequences were still moving, quietly and without warning. 2 weeks after Grayson's arrest, I received a call from the lawyer. He told me there was an additional investigation, not about the affair, not about the company, about money that had moved through my name without my knowledge, accounts opened using shared access, documents signed electronically while I was on night shifts, transactions small enough to avoid attention but consistent. That was when I understood how carefully this had been planned. Grayson had not only built a future with Tiffany, he had been preparing an exit from me. The lawyer told me the transfers stopped the night of the anniversary. When Grayson realized the plan had failed, he abandoned everything. That panic saved me. Had it continued even a week longer, the damage would have been permanent. I was called in to give a formal statement. I answered every question. I handed over every record. Each answer closed another door behind Grayson. There was no room left for denial. That evening, Matthew came to see me. He did not bring comfort. He brought information. Tiffany had tried to negotiate. She offered partial confessions in exchange for reduced charges. She blamed Grayson. She claimed manipulation. The evidence contradicted her. Matthew told me something else then. The private investigator had uncovered earlier hotel stays, months before the stroke. Before the restaurant, before I ever suspected anything. The affair had not begun recently, it had only become visible. That knowledge settled heavily. It meant my marriage had already ended long before my birthday. I had just been the last person to know. A few days later, Grayson requested to speak to me, through his lawyer. I refused. He sent a letter instead. I did not open it. I placed it in a drawer and left it there. Silence was the only response he would get. The trial dates were set. Everything moved forward with precision. No delays, no favors. Tiffany's image as the devoted wife had collapsed completely. Friends distanced themselves. Family withdrew support. The admiration she had relied on vanished overnight. One night, as I was packing the last of my things, I found the birthday card Grayson had left on the kitchen counter. It was unsigned. He had never finished it. I threw it away without opening it. By the time the court issued the final judgments, I was no longer living in the city. I had transferred my position quietly. No announcements, no explanations. What remained behind me was not pain anymore, it was evidence. Records, timelines, proof. The story was no longer emotional. It was documented. The trial did not begin the way I expected. There was no dramatic opening, no sudden confrontation. It moved quietly, like something that had already decided its ending before anyone stepped into the room. Matthew testified first. He presented the timeline calmly. From the moment he suspected Tiffany to the night he revealed everything publicly. He spoke without anger. That made his words heavier. Every detail matched the evidence. Every claim was supported. There were no gaps to challenge. Then the recordings were played again. This time, not in a ballroom, but in a courtroom. The doctor's voice admitting the bribe, Tiffany's instructions, dates, amounts. The judge listened without interruption. Tiffany avoided looking up. When Grayson was brought in, I did not recognize him immediately. He looked thinner, not tired, cornered. He avoided my direction entirely. When his lawyer spoke, the defense was brief. Cooperation, regret, influence, none of it changed the facts. Then something unexpected happened. Tiffany turned on him completely. She testified that Grayson had encouraged the plan, that he knew about the fake report before it was finalized, that he pushed for the anniversary reveal. She said he wanted Matthew removed quickly so they could move forward without delay. Her voice was steady. She was not protecting anyone anymore. Grayson reacted for the first time. He stood abruptly. The judge ordered him to sit. The moment passed, but the damage was done. Whatever agreement existed between them was over. During a recess, Matthew's lawyer approached me. He told me Tiffany had tried to access additional funds using my name weeks before the anniversary. The request failed because of an internal hold I didn't know existed. A safeguard placed long ago during a routine audit. Another accident that stopped the plan from going further. That realization stayed with me. If any single step had gone differently, I would have been pulled deeper into something I never agreed to. When the court resumed, the verdicts came faster than expected. Tiffany was found guilty on all major charges. The doctor's license was permanently revoked. Grayson was convicted as an accomplice. There was no appeal filed, no delays requested. I did not feel satisfaction when the sentences were read. I felt distance. The story had detached itself from me. It belonged to records now. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. I walked past them without stopping. No statements, no reactions. That night, I booked a one-way move. Not because I was running, because nothing remained to be faced. I thought leaving the city would end it. It did not. Distance only revealed what had been hidden underneath everything else. 2 days before I was scheduled to move, Matthew called again. His tone was different, controlled but tight. He told me the investigator had uncovered something they had not prioritized earlier because it seemed unrelated. It wasn't. There was a second account, not in Tiffany's name, not in Grayson's. It was under a shell company created months before the stroke. The registered contact email belonged to Grayson. The listed beneficiary was me. I asked Matthew what that meant. He said it meant Grayson had been planning to disappear long before the anniversary. The money was meant to move quietly. If the company takeover succeeded, the funds would be justified. If it failed, the blame would fall elsewhere. Either way, my name would be tied to it. That was when I understood why Grayson had kept our finances shared while slowly locking me out of decisions. Why he encouraged me to work longer hours. Why he insisted on electronic access for convenience. I had not been a partner. I had been a cover. The lawyer moved quickly. He froze the account before anything could be transferred. The paper trail showed intent clearly. This was no longer about betrayal. It was about preparation. That same night, Grayson requested another meeting. This time, through the court. He claimed there was information I needed to hear directly from him. The judge approved a supervised conversation. I agreed. When he sat across from me, there was no anger left in him, no charm either. He asked if I had seen the shell account. I did not answer. He told me he had planned everything carefully. He said he never meant for it to end like this. That was the first lie he told me in weeks. He admitted the plan depended on silence, on my predictable trust, on Matthew's illness being permanent. He said the anniversary exposure destroyed the timing. Panic ruined everything else. I asked him one question. If none of this had been exposed, would he have left me? He hesitated. That hesitation was the answer. When the meeting ended, he was escorted away. I signed the last document needed to remove my name from every shared structure. The lawyer told me I was clear. Legally, completely. That night, I slept without setting an alarm for the first time in months. The next morning, I packed the last box and closed the door behind me. I did not know then that the story still had one final move left. I left San Jose before sunrise. I did not tell anyone except Matthew and the lawyer. The move was quiet, planned in gaps between court dates and paperwork. I wanted no delays, no loose ends. I believed I had seen everything. I was wrong. 3 weeks after I settled into my new place, Matthew called again. He said one of the investigators had revisited older files, not related to the company, but to Grayson's employment history. Something did not match. A past case, a missing reference, a timeline that overlapped strangely with Tiffany's early movements. Grayson had met Tiffany before the stroke, not casually, not recently. They crossed paths through a consulting project tied to Matthew's company. The relationship started there. The affair did not grow into the plan. The plan grew around the affair. That meant the illness was not the opportunity. It was the trigger. Matthew told me the investigator found messages from over a year earlier. Grayson discussing, waiting for the right disruption. Tiffany responding that she could manage the family image. The language was careful. No names, no direct intent, but the meaning was clear. They had been waiting for something to break. The stroke gave them timing. Another detail followed, one that made me sit down. Grayson had searched for legal outcomes related to spouses unknowingly tied to financial crimes. Repeatedly, months before my birthday, he was building protection for himself by putting risk onto me. I realized then that my silence, my routines, my trust had all been counted on. The affair was personal. The rest was calculated. That same week, Grayson filed a motion from prison. He claimed coercion. He claimed Tiffany had manipulated him. He requested reduced sentencing in exchange for additional testimony. The motion included new allegations. He claimed Tiffany had planned to leave him once the company transfer was complete, that she intended to use my name to shield assets, then disappear. He presented messages, partial ones, enough to force another review. The case reopened briefly. I was contacted again, asked to verify timelines, asked to confirm access points. Each question reinforced the same truth. None of this had been impulsive. The motion failed. Grayson's cooperation changed nothing. The evidence against him was already complete. The judge denied the request without comment. When I received that update, I felt something close to relief for the first time. Not because justice was done, but because the story no longer shifted. No new angles, no hidden layers waiting to surface. I thought that meant the end. Then I received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the line said my name once, then paused. It was Tiffany. I did not respond when Tiffany said my name. I waited. Silence made people reveal more than anger ever could. She spoke again, slower this time, as if measuring every word. She said she wanted to explain. She said Grayson had lied to me more than I knew. She said there were things in the investigation that never reached the court. I told her not to call me again. She ignored that. She told me she had information that could change how everything ended. She said if I hung up, she would give it to someone else. That was the first threat. Soft, indirect, but clear. I asked her one question: what information? She said there was a document that never made it into evidence, a financial authorization with my digital signature. She said it was created months before my birthday. She said it was meant to activate only after the company transfer. She said Grayson designed it that way. I told her the account had been frozen. She said she knew. She said the document still existed, and that possession mattered. I ended the call. An hour later, she sent a message. A photo. A screenshot of a form, my name, my signature. A timestamp that matched a night I was on call at the hospital. I stared at it until my eyes hurt. The signature was accurate. Too accurate. I called the lawyer immediately. He told me to forward everything and not reply. He said forged authorization with correct biometric data meant one thing: someone had inside access. That night, I did not sleep. The next morning, the lawyer confirmed it. Grayson had used shared authentication devices, old backups. Access I never thought to revoke. The document was real but never executed. It had been built as leverage, insurance. Tiffany called again. I did not answer. Instead, the lawyer contacted the court. The document was added to the case file as further evidence of conspiracy. Tiffany lost any bargaining power she thought she had left. That afternoon, a restraining order was issued. All contact stopped. 2 days later, Matthew called. Tiffany had been moved to a different facility. Her call privileges were suspended. The last move she tried had sealed her position completely. That was the moment I understood something clearly. The affair had ended months ago. The control attempts had not. And now, finally, they were done. After Tiffany's call privileges were suspended, everything went quiet. That silence felt unnatural. I had learned by then that quiet usually meant someone was planning something else. A week later, the lawyer contacted me again. He said the prosecution had finalized sentencing recommendations. Tiffany would receive the maximum for conspiracy and fraud. Grayson's sentence would not be reduced. The shell company records, the forged authorization, and the attempted asset shift had closed every possible argument. But there was one remaining risk. The lawyer explained that once sentencing was complete, certain sealed records could become accessible through civil filings. That meant Grayson could still try one last move: a civil claim. Not for money, but for delay. Delay meant leverage. I authorized the lawyer to move first. Within 48 hours, a civil counteraction was filed in my name. It locked my financial history permanently from third-party claims tied to the case. Every shared access point was revoked. Every authorization was invalidated retroactively. The structure Grayson built collapsed without him ever touching it again. The lawyer told me this would provoke a response. He was right. Grayson filed a handwritten motion from prison 3 days later. He requested a personal statement be added to the record. He claimed remorse. He claimed manipulation. He claimed he had intended to protect me. The judge denied the motion without a hearing. That denial ended his ability to speak legally. I received the notice while sitting alone at my kitchen table. I read it twice to make sure I understood. There would be no more filings, no more requests, no more contact. That evening, Matthew called for the last time about the case. He told me the company board had formally reinstated him. Tiffany's name had been removed from every record. Her access was erased completely. Matthew said something else then. He said the investigator found evidence that Tiffany had planned to leave the country after the anniversary. Tickets purchased under another name. Funds staged. Everything depended on success that night. Failure had trapped her instead. When the call ended, I realized the story had finally stopped moving forward. No new threats, no hidden documents, no unanswered questions. The next morning, I went to work as usual. No one there knew what had happened. No one needed to. That night, I slept without interruption. The suspense that had followed me for months was gone, not replaced by peace, but by certainty. And certainty, I learned, was enough. Sentencing day arrived without warning. I was not supposed to attend, but I did. I sat behind the last row, unnoticed, listening to names that once belonged to my private life being read aloud like case numbers. Tiffany was brought in first. She did not look at anyone. The judge listed the charges in order: fraud, bribery, conspiracy, attempted embezzlement. Each word closed another door. When her sentence was announced, she finally reacted, not with tears. With disbelief. The plan she had built so carefully had not failed quietly. It had failed completely. Grayson was brought in next. He stood when ordered. He did not look for me this time. The court read his role clearly. Accomplice, financial manipulation, attempted concealment. The judge noted his cooperation attempts had come too late. His sentence was shorter than Tiffany's, but final. There were no speeches, no apologies accepted. The gavel ended it. When I left the building, I felt lighter than I expected. Not relieved, finished. 2 weeks later, the divorce was finalized. No disputes, no delays. The judge asked if I had anything to add. I said no. The signature ended the marriage more cleanly than any argument ever could. That night, Matthew sent me one last update. The company was stable. Tiffany's shares were seized. The damage had been contained. The story was over on his side. I thought it was over on mine too. Then a package arrived. No return address, no note inside, just a USB drive. I did not plug it in. I called the lawyer immediately. He told me to bring it to his office untouched. He said items like that rarely arrived by accident. The drive was analyzed in a controlled environment. What it contained was not new evidence. It was recordings. Conversations, older than everything else. Grayson speaking to Tiffany before the stroke, discussing timing, discussing me. He said my name once, casually, like a variable. The lawyer told me it changed nothing legally. The case was closed, but it explained something important. I had never been a victim of circumstance. I had been part of a calculation. I asked where the package came from. The lawyer said it was traced to Tiffany's former assistant, someone who decided to protect herself by exposing everything. That night, I deleted the files. The truth no longer needed proof. After the USB was deleted, I expected quiet. Instead, I received one final summons: a civil review, mandatory appearance. The assistant who sent the drive had filed a protection request and named everyone involved, including me, as a reference point in the timeline. I was asked to testify, not about emotion, but about access. Dates, devices, shared permissions. I answered carefully. Each answer closed another possibility. The assistant's testimony confirmed what the investigators already suspected. Grayson had used layered access methods, old backups, secondary devices. He assumed no one would audit something that appeared routine. That assumption failed. During the hearing, one detail surfaced that no one had mentioned before. Tiffany had attempted to delay the anniversary reveal by 1 week. She wanted more time to move assets. Grayson had refused. He insisted it happen that night. He believed speed would prevent scrutiny. That decision destroyed them both. When the hearing ended, the assistant was granted protection. The case was officially sealed. No further filings were allowed. Any remaining claims were dismissed automatically. I left knowing there would be no more calls, no more documents, no more sudden turns. 3 days later, I received a notice confirming my financial records were permanently cleared. No flags, no associations. My name was removed completely. That was the first time I felt real control return. I changed my number that afternoon. I closed the last shared account. I erased the final link. That evening, Matthew called once more. Not about the case. He told me he was selling the house. He said some places should not be lived in after the truth settles. I agreed. That night I sat alone and realized something unsettling. The suspense was gone. The threat was gone, but the clarity remained sharp. Nothing had been accidental, not the affair, not the timing, not the silence. And because of that, there was nothing left to fear. I believed the story had finally reached its end. Then I received a notification from the court system. One final update had been added to the case file. It was not a motion. It was a statement. Grayson had submitted it before losing his right to speak. It was not addressed to the judge. It was addressed to me. The lawyer warned me I did not have to read it. I read it anyway. Grayson did not apologize. He explained. He wrote that he had never planned to stay married once the company transfer was complete. He said the marriage had become structural, useful, predictable. He admitted he relied on my routine, my work hours, my trust. He said Tiffany believed control came from emotion, but real control came from patience. That sentence stayed with me longer than the rest. He wrote that the birthday dinner was not a coincidence. He had assumed I would stay home. Cook, wait, that assumption had been part of the plan. When I did not, everything shifted. He ended the statement by saying this. If you had stayed that night, none of this would have happened yet. That was the closest thing to truth he had ever given me. I closed the file and signed the acknowledgement that I had read it. The system timestamped it. That was the last legal interaction between us. A week later, Matthew informed me that Grayson had been transferred to a different facility. No contact, no appeals. His role in the story was finished. The same day, I received confirmation that Tiffany had accepted a plea adjustment, not a reduction, a condition. She would no longer be eligible for parole hearings for several years. The assistant's testimony had sealed that outcome. Everything was locked. That evening, I realized something unsettling. The most dangerous part of the story was never the betrayal. It was the assumption that I would remain passive. I did not feel anger when I understood that. I felt distance. I deleted the court app from my phone. I removed the last reminders. I closed the folder that held copies of everything. The story no longer followed me. And that was when I finally knew it was over. I tried to return to a normal routine. Work, sleep, short conversations that avoided the past. For a few weeks, it worked. Then something surfaced that reminded me why silence had always been dangerous. An internal audit at the hospital flagged an unusual access attempt tied to my old credentials. It was not successful, but it was deliberate. Someone had tried to pull archived records connected to my name, financial forms, employment verification, anything that could be misused. The hospital security team contacted me immediately. They asked if I had authorized anyone. I said no. They traced the attempt. It came from an external network routed through a legal research service, a service commonly used by inmates preparing appeals. Grayson. He was trying to build something again, not a case, a narrative. The lawyer acted before I had time to react. He filed an emergency restriction order. Every professional record tied to me was sealed. Any future access attempts would trigger automatic alerts. That night Matthew called. He had received a similar notice. Grayson had tried to request corporate archives under an old consulting clause. The request was denied. Too late, too obvious. Grayson was not trying to change the verdict. He was trying to rewrite the story. 2 days later, the court intervened. Grayson was formally barred from initiating any further record requests connected to me. The notice was final. Violating it would add time to his sentence. That was when the attempt stopped. A week passed, then another. No calls, no alerts, no letters. The silence returned, but this time it felt different. It felt enforced. One evening, I received a message from the lawyer. Short, direct. The court has closed all remaining access vectors. I understood what that meant. There were no doors left to knock on, no systems left to test, no leverage left to exploit. The story had resisted closure for months because someone believed it could still be controlled. That belief was gone now. I stood in my apartment that night and realized something simple. The suspense that once followed every decision had disappeared, not because the damage was undone, but because nothing else could reach me. And for the first time since my birthday, I felt ahead of the story instead of trapped inside it. I thought distance and court orders were enough. They were not. Control does not disappear quietly. It looks for one last opening. Late one night, Matthew called. He said investigators had found a delayed action buried inside Tiffany's old planning files. Not money, not access, reputation. A sealed packet prepared to be released only if everything failed. The packet contained selected emails, edited timelines, and partial messages meant to suggest I had known earlier and stayed silent. Not enough to hold up in court. Enough to create doubt. Enough to damage credibility if leaked carefully. The assistant who exposed the USB had intercepted it before release. She turned it over immediately. That decision stopped the final move. The lawyer explained the intent clearly. If Tiffany could not win legally, she would fracture trust publicly. She would shift suspicion. She would make everyone involved look compromised. The material was analyzed line by line. Every edit was traceable. Every omission was intentional. The manipulation was obvious to professionals, dangerous only to people who did not know the full story. The prosecution added the packet to the record as proof of continued conspiracy. That single act removed any remaining chance of early review or reduced conditions. Tiffany's response was silence. The following week, the court issued its last directive. No further submissions from any party, no public release of sealed materials. Any attempt would trigger immediate penalties. That was the luck. Matthew told me the investigators had closed their files. The company's board had finalized leadership changes. The past would not be revisited again. That night, I realized something important. The suspense was never about what would happen next. It was about whether someone would try again. Now, there was no one left who could. I shut off my phone and slept through the night without interruption. The story had lost its ability to move. The last update came without drama. No calls, no warnings, just a formal notice delivered through the lawyer. All related cases were officially closed. No appeals pending, no civil actions remaining, no sealed materials scheduled for review. The language was dry, but the meaning was final. I read it twice to be sure, then I archived the file. That afternoon, Matthew called to confirm the same thing from his side. The board had voted unanimously. Tiffany's name was permanently removed from every corporate record. Her shares were redistributed, her authority erased. The company would never reference her again. Grayson's status was unchanged. Sentence confirmed, no privileges restored, no pending requests. He had stopped trying. Whether from exhaustion or understanding did not matter. What mattered was that nothing was moving anymore. A week later, a news article appeared online. Short, clinical, it summarized the case in paragraphs stripped of emotion. Fraud scheme exposed, doctor bribery confirmed. 2 defendants sentenced. No mention of birthdays, no mention of marriages, no mention of me. I read it once and closed it. That same day, I received confirmation of my transfer approval. New position, new department, No overlap with my previous records. Clean separation. The system treated me like someone starting fresh. That night, I packed again. This time, not in a rush, no hidden compartments, no emergency folders, just what I needed. Before leaving, I checked the old email address one last time. Nothing new, no drafts, no scheduled messages, no traps waiting to trigger. I deleted the account. The next morning, as I walked out, I realized something subtle. The suspense that once defined every decision had disappeared not because the danger was dramatic, but because it was complete. There were no loose threads left to pull. Every move had already been made. And I was no longer part of the board. I did not announce the end of the story to anyone. Endings like this do not need witnesses. They need distance. 3 months after the final notice, I stood in a courtroom one last time. Not as a defendant, not as a witness, just as a name being read and released. The divorce decree was confirmed. Assets divided cleanly, no objections, no statements added. The judge signed and it was done. Grayson was present by video. He did not look at the screen. He did not speak. The connection ended as soon as the ruling was entered. That was the last time our names appeared in the same record. A week later, I received confirmation that Tiffany had been transferred to a long-term facility. No media access, no interviews, no public statements allowed. Whatever version of the story she still believed in would stay locked with her. I moved again, not because I was running but because I could. A new hospital, a higher position. A clean file. No one there knew my history, and no one needed to. One evening, as I unpacked the last box, I found the photo from the restaurant. The one I had taken through the glass. I had kept it for proof. I no longer needed it. I deleted it and emptied the folder. Nothing happened when I did. No weight lifted. No rush of relief. Just confirmation that the moment had passed. Later that night, Matthew sent a short message. He said the company had closed the final audit. Everything was stable. He thanked me once, not emotionally, precisely, the way people speak when they know the cost of silence. I replied once and archived the thread. There were no final confrontations, no confessions left unread, no secrets waiting to surface. Every move that could be made had already been made. The story did not end loudly. It ended the way it had unfolded, quietly, deliberately, with control returning to the person who had almost lost it. And that was enough. You have reached the end of the text.